Protest in Kiev turned deadly.
Well, the violent protests in Kiev, Ukraine have taken a deadly turn. At the time of this broadcast, 14 people have died, with hundreds more injured. It's the worst violence being reported since the protests began in late November. Now, it's being painted that these protesters want to join the EU and evil Russia just isn't letting them. But I would venture to say that most of these people could care less about joining the EU or any of the globalist elites, but rather would fight for what little payment they're receiving from Soros and other EU-backed groups. Now, the protesters are reportedly being paid between 15 and 25 euros. The Assistant Secretary of State Victoria Nuland told the National Press Club last December that the U.S. has invested $5 billion in organizing a network to achieve U.S. goals in Ukraine in order to give Ukraine the future it deserves. Now, I guess if she means organizing a network of paid protesters to dismantle the governments that the Ukraine can be looted, like Latvia and Greece, and then Washington can just use the Ukraine to set up bases in order to fight Russia, well, I doubt that that's the future that Ukrainians think they deserve. Now, the average man on the street in Kiev may be fighting for independence from the Russians that have plagued them since Stalin. Against corruption, they may be fighting against crony capitalism, but their leaders are just puppets of the CIA and Western bankers. And unfortunately, what these paid protesters might find when the smoke settles is that the new boss is the same as the old boss.
Ukraine riots heat up after the rioters seize over 1,500 guns.
Rioters seize over 1,500 guns in Ukraine mayhem. Ukraine's security service has announced it's launching a counter-terror operation. Radicals have seized over 1,500 firing arms and 100,000 bullets in the past 24 hours, the security service says. Now, these 100,000 bullets is nothing compared to what they're stocking up domestically for the DHS. But back to the matter at hand, these arms are being seized from military depots and other places as well. Now, of course, this is the situation in Kiev, where rioters, protesters, whatever they're being called this week, have been clashing with police. There have been buildings burned down, fires in the street, complete mayhem. And I do definitely have a lot of respect for the Kiev police, at least as far as they're handling the situation with non-lethal force. We've seen many rioters using lethal force against the police, using weapons with live ammunition, also using the fiery cocktails and so forth. So I definitely respect the restraint of the Kiev police, because here in the States, it wouldn't have got this far without the police coming back with lethal force, because we live in a country where if you break up a fight, you'll get tased by the police. But if you're having a seizure, you'll get tased by the police. If you're peacefully protesting outside of a college, you'll get pepper sprayed in the face. If somebody else robs a bank and you show up and you run from the cops, they'll shoot you in the back, even though you didn't match the description of the guy who robbed the bank. That's the kind of country that we live in here in the States. But at least respect the police. You know, I'm not agreeing with the whole situation in Kiev on either side, or on multiple sides, but I definitely respect that the police are not killing their own citizens in the streets. Now, more on the Kiev situation. We have this article from Kurt Nimmo. Bush-era diplomat says Ukraine's situation is a threat to national security.
We can see this all over the world, American influence slipping away in Ukraine and Venezuela and the Middle East, and we will pay the price of this for a long time unless people speak up.
Now, that was former United Nations Ambassador John Bolton, and as Kurt Nimmo points out in the article, Bolton failed to explain how the civil strife in Ukraine and Venezuela adversely affect the national security of the United States. He insisted that it's the responsibility of the U.S. to respond when selectively chosen friends of the United States, in effect friends of liberty, find themselves on the barricades. And that's exactly right, because we see in selective enforcement, selective help, because you think about recently, or more recently, with the Kony 2012 situation, where many people said that Kony was already dead, or at least missing. These are people from Uganda before 2012. And it definitely is a horrible thing that they have the children out killing each other, out there in Uganda. But, people got involved in that because of the resources of Uganda, not just because they're so humanitarian and just good go-getting people. So we'll talk more about this. Alex Jones is going to break down not the Kony 2012 situation, but the situation in Kiev, where we have the riots in the streets, the protesters, the rioters fighting with police. So he's going to give us a breakdown that he gave on the Alex Jones radio show.
The collapsed former Soviet attempted world order. And you have the George Soros, CIA, globalist-funded groups, many of which have real beefs with the government, absolutely going wild absolutely attacking and shooting police. They've stolen thousands of, quote, firearms from the military and police, calling for the country to join the EU. They're mad that the government a few months ago, and there was also a vote in their parliament, did not enter the EU. Listen, I don't want them to join Russia or the EU. How about we have sovereign countries again that aren't dominated by corrupt kleptocratic empires? The bottom line here is just like the Syria civil war, it is the West quarterbacking and running this entire operation. The scenes were something out of Dante's Inferno, and it's still ongoing. More than 10 miles of flame in downtown Kiev, the capital city of the Ukraine, the battleground between the Anglo-American New World Order and the collapsed former Soviet attempted world order. And you have the George Soros, CIA, globalist-funded groups, many of which have real beefs with the government, absolutely going wild, absolutely attacking and shooting police. They've stolen thousands of, quote, firearms from the military and police, calling for the country to join the EU. They're mad that the government a few months ago, and there was also a vote in their parliament, did not enter the EU. Listen, I don't want them to join Russia or the EU. How about we have sovereign countries again that aren't dominated by corrupt kleptocratic empires? The bottom line here is just like the Syria civil war, it is the West quarterbacking and running this entire operation. And it is absolutely incredible. Under law, folks, when you start the preemptive war, you're the bad guy. AKA Hitler, AKA Mussolini, AKA so many other examples that we know of historically, like Napoleon. The list goes on and on. The British Redcoats coming to confiscate the guns and shooting people. This is the real issue that we're dealing with. And it is so frustrating to see neocon organizations and the so-called left in this country as well, calling them freedom fighters, ladies and gentlemen, when in most cities in the U.S., if you peacefully go out and demonstrate, you'll get arrested or beat up, and that's all wonderful. But when these people are throwing Molotov cocktails on police that have been very restrained in the last month of this and shooting them, and then the police fire back, and by the way, it's an elected government that's not even pro-Russia, I should add, but did not join the EU to be absolutely imploded. And now the EU is calling for sanctions on Ukraine, just like they did on Serbia, to then further depress it and break it up and break the country into multiple pieces. This is incredible balkanization. European Union told that they're going to hold emergency meetings of foreign ministers as leaders warn sanctions are likely following the latest clashes. That's right. Just like there'd be sanctions in Egypt if they didn't let the Muslim Brotherhood take over and then start crucifying the Christians and blowing up their churches. And again, it's not that I back the military junta in Egypt. It's a lot better than Al-Qaeda. And again, why is our government involved? Why are they backing it? Why do they start the war in Libya, start the war in Syria, and put people conservatively more than 10 times worse in, who then destabilize the whole region, pour out of Syria now into Iraq, retook Fallujah, and are killing the Iraqi military and U.S. advisors? I mean, this is a policy of chaos, and George Soros and Brzezinski Brzezinski and all these anti-Russian types are right at the middle of it, folks, starting wars on the steppes of Russia, just like Napoleon and Hitler, and it is wrong, 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 wrong. And the British Empire has been trying to bring down Russia for 300 years. They've been allied with them back and forth, World War I, you name it, but this is a total double cross. In 1917, putting the Bolsheviks in. We should apologize to the Russians. Do you know where the commies came from? Our government, look it up, 50,000 brigade level, multi-brigade. How many brigades is 50,000? That's a whole bunch. It's like 10 of them. Sent out of New York, communist, paramilitary, money out of London to overthrow Moscow, folks, and then kill tens of millions of people. Our criminal elite did that. They created the stinking cesspit that is Russia.
Rallying patriots worldwide in defense of human liberty. It's Alex Jones.
Generals gathered in their masses.
All over the world, governments are falling. All over the planet, populations are rising up and burning down large parts of their cities, burning down government buildings, and then killing ethnic minorities as soon as the government's been removed. And in every case, whether it was Libya or Tunisia or Egypt or Syria, or what we're seeing unfold in other parts of the world, it is the globalist, it is the Ford Foundation, Google, and others who later brag, and it comes out that they are the ones who are out there funding the organizations to start the rioting to begin with. And the big think tanks admit in the last few years, and we've covered it here on air, and even traveled to England to cover it at the very same hotel where Google met secretly with MI6 and others to plan the Arab Spring. The banksters are devaluing currencies worldwide. That only hurts you if you live in America or live in, say, England. But if you live in a place like Egypt and 55% of your disposable income that might be $600, $700 a year is food, and food prices double, what happens if 55% of your money in 2010 in Egypt, we can look up the numbers, this is one example, you're spending 55% of your money on food, and then suddenly over the next few years it doubles. Do the math. That's 110% of your money. You begin to starve, ladies and gentlemen. Look at the Egyptians. They're very skinny now. They weren't just a few years ago. They are starving. The globalists have actuaries on record. They know with these computer programs, war gamed, on record. They know when you're going to order at Amazon before you order it and already ship it, okay? I'm telling you about this for a long time now. It's mainstream news. Not because I'm smart. It's been in all the MIT papers for decades. But that was their holy grail, that they've attained it in the last decade. And now they can game everything. They know how to manipulate oil prices, food prices, you name it, to make a country blow up, and they know when it's going to blow up. So they show up a month before it's going to blow up, and they know how it's going to blow up with a pro-liberty, egalitarian awakening movement in Egypt that is going to put down the Muslim Brotherhood and even put down the government control and create a golden age in Egypt. There was a lot of stuff lining up for that with a lot of youth that had gotten into freedom and things. And the system said, we're not going to let that happen, just like they did in '53 in Iran when pro-America Mossadegh was in there. They put in the radical jihadis to overthrow him. Then they double-crossed them and put the Shah in. Just like they put al-Qaeda into Libya because they were helping Africa. Libya was building up all of Africa like a real IMF would do. And working with the West, and Gaddafi bought into all of it, was meeting with all the European presidents and had apologized for stuff and invested most of his money with big U.S. banks. They set him up, folks. He opened up everything, built big hotels, was giving money to all of Africa. He'd live in a tent. I'm not romanticizing Muammar Gaddafi, but compared to our leaders, he's the real deal. Self-made, ladies and gentlemen, and actually spent 99% of the dictator wealth on the people. Not allowed, ladies and gentlemen, not allowed. They put al-Qaeda in there, they put burqas back on the women's heads, and they killed all the minority Muslims and the blacks in the country. On record, 40,000 blacks lined up and shot or chopped up with machetes by the al-Qaeda people out of Saudi Arabia who are extremely anti-black. That's why I never get why a lot of blacks are big Wahhabists and follow that particular part of Islam in those groups, because, man, I've read their writings on black people. It makes the Ku Klux Klan sound pro-black. You ought to go read it yourself if you want to. I'm not going to repeat it on air. But I guess I'm racist. I don't want to kill the black people. But anyways, the whole point here, ladies and gentlemen, is that that's what's going on in Kiev right now. And I saw on Fox News last night with Shepard Smith, when I got off the show in the afternoon, I knew there was fires going on for weeks. this river of flame. We found one from the air, but that's small. It was at nighttime. And it went for 10 miles with the buildings and the skyscrapers and just went on and on. Hundreds of feet of flame going for miles like a Dante's Inferno. We're trying to find it. The crew's doing a great job. We're digging around for it. And we can just go TiVo, Shepard Smith's show from yesterday. They had it up on that big Jumbotron. And it was incredible where he was pointing it all out. And they're calling them protesters and freedom fighters in our news. And ladies and gentlemen, these people are shooting the police preemptively. They've been given weapons, obviously. And I'm a pro-Second Amendment guy. If they were overthrowing a communist government, I'd say hooray, hooray. If they were overthrowing an unelected government, I'd say good for you. They're not. It's an elected government that didn't vote to join the EU a month ago, and all hell broke loose. And the EU on record is to come in, take over your country, hand over all the infrastructure, and bankrupt it on record. I mean, who wants to join the EU? That's like joining a sinking ship. But it's all about taking down Russia. People go, well, good, we need to take down Russia. Folks, the globalists are taking us down with Agenda 21, our farms, our ranches, our businesses, our power plants. We don't want to be part of the criminal elements of Wall Street and the Bank of England and others that are wrecking all these different countries. This is very evil. This is economic warfare. And believe me, folks, if the police in this country are ordered to go out and confiscate guns, civil war like this times, let's not exaggerate, we're a lot bigger country, a lot bigger population. Let me be conservative. Civil war of this, I'd say 50 times this. Because by the way, people aren't just going to start burning trash cans and stuff. Patriots, libertarians, conservatives, don't ever protest, you notice, because when they do, they protest like 1776. And it's not going to be pretty. And the globalists actually want to maneuver this. And this is what I want to explain to you today. What we're seeing in Kiev and what we see going on there and what we see happening there is a microcosm of how the globalists operate. They don't usually invade your country. They don't usually come in with an overwhelming force openly. The Bushes did that, and that was against main globalist policy, but the establishment let them do it as a test. They do it by fomenting opposition and overthrow groups and balkanization and destabilization programs. Then they take over that country and use it the next phase to exploit to the next country, try to infiltrate and overthrow it. That's how the globalists operate, through subversion. It's on record. And they have already created in the last 60 years through the different foundations, the Carnegie, the Ford Foundation, mainly on that case, teaching that the Southwest belongs to Mexico, teaching that whites are inherently racist in all the high schools, all the colleges. I went to college. I went to high school. I was taught that in Dallas. I was taught that in Austin in high school. I was taught that at community college, and so I didn't go to main college. Every class, it could be math, it could be U.S. history, it could be psychology. I was taking a bunch of courses to see what I liked. It was white people are bad, America's bad, the Southwest belongs to Mexico, and we're going to have a communist takeover, and we're going to take the guns, and all of you white people should be ashamed of yourselves. This was all coming out of white people's mouths. And when I wrote papers against it, they would give me Fs, and I would write misspelled as a test, screwed up ones, worshiping communism and stuff as a sick joke. I did it a few times. They would give me A+ and invite me for coffee afterwards. And I said, that's it, I'm out of here. I'm going to go do an Access TV show. The only place I can get on air, I'm going to fight these people. And now you see the universities, you see it everywhere. I mean, it is just incredible what is going on so that they can then have the riots start up whenever they want in this country. You don't just think they're going to come for the guns and then leave it at that and have a civil war over there. No, no, no. They're going to stage some race stuff and get the Southwest burning. And then it'll be, oh, there'll be sanctions on the U.S. if they don't let this become its own autonomous zone, where they put us into a North American Union, what Obama's going to Mexico right now to do. And then they always then have a super union with the old groups, the old countries, broken up into small little groups within it. So globalism is the opposite of unity and the opposite of sovereignty. It's totally exploitive, totally predatory. And so you watch. Ukraine will be much worse in a year than it is now. If they would have gone under the EU, it would have been much worse for them. And this is what the government of the Ukraine now gets because they didn't join the EU, the incredibly predatory EU. And when they voted a month ago, remember, to not join, I said, that's it, get ready for their cities to burn. On record, it's not hard. You don't join NATO, you don't join the EU, they're going to overthrow your country just like Serbia. In that case, they brought in radical Wahhabist Muslims out of Albania, had them blow up churches, shoot little kids on the street. The Serbs got mad, attacked them. I mean, I'm not taking sides for the Serb folks. I have no Slavic blood in me. I've never been to Serbia. I just studied real geopolitics and what actually happened under Bill Clinton. And they would have a guy with tuberculosis wanting into a food tent that had wire around it, and Time Magazine and Newsweek and all of them would show it, and CNN going, look at this starving man in a Serb concentration camp. It was all lies, folks. The Serbs in the UN's own numbers lost double to triple depending on which war in the 90s, and were always the ones being attacked. Just like when the Syrians fight back against the outside al-Qaeda invasion, oh, it's a horrible atrocity. And they brought in the al-Qaeda into the south, and they took a third of the country. Kosovo is a drug running around, and now they're still attacking up into the rest of the country. And this is how the globalists operate, and they bombed Belgrade and the rest of the country with depleted uranium. Why not give old Clinton 5 peace prizes for that? All because it was a sovereign country, and they broke it up, folks. After the fall of the Soviet Union, and you know, Tito had been dead a long time, all that whole place was getting along fine. The whole Balkans, where we get the term balkanization, the whole Balkans was getting along until the West came in and did that, just like the Middle East. This is such an evil divide and conquer policy. It is so bad, and they're going to do it here in America. I try to study all the major countries in the world, and I do know quite a bit about Ukraine. Probably more than most of the so-called ambassadors Obama sends around. But that's not saying much. It's on record that most of the ambassadors don't even know where the countries are they're being sent to, and brag about it, and can't speak any of the language, and it is very insulting to the people that are having these ambassadors sent to them. Usually you send an ambassador who's an American citizen but had family there and a culture there, if you want to get anything done. Like if, you know, the U.S. ambassador to England should generally be an Anglophile and have family in England and, you know, have some background there and know about British culture or UK culture. And it's just an example. I mean, there's Obama's ambassador to Norway, knows nothing about Norway, and brags he knows nothing about Norway. But I know quite a bit about Ukraine. Really smart, great people who had it really hard in between Europe and those wars, and in between the old czars and then the Russians under communism. But this is a new empire of the EU and the globalists, teamed up with the Anglo-American establishment, coming in to take over and privatize everything and absolutely just drag these people through the mud. And there's problems with the government. There's corruption. There's all the standard stuff. They've been putting new governments in every couple of years over there. This government's just trying to be neutral. And it looked like on a lot of fronts was trying to be nice to the Russians and nice to the EU and just trying to have trade and saying, we'll just be on our own. No, thank you. The EU looks like a bad deal. And, of course, they activated Soros. And, I mean, Soros is like herpes or something. I mean, he just is the gift that keeps on giving. Do I need to say anything more about what's happening in the Ukraine, but that George Soros is on record right in the middle of it? What an uncool person. And look at what they did back in 2008 with the neocons. It's the same agenda. Starting a war with Russia in South Ossetia and Abkhazia in northern Georgia. We almost had a nuclear war right there. And our media said Russia had attacked Georgia. They had national news say that I was a collaborator because I came out and said that we attacked the Russians. Later, they had to admit that was the case. They ran a hoax, folks. They could start a war tomorrow with the Russian border territory. A demilitarized zone. They've got a bunch of those. And we'd have nuclear war, and we'd always be told the Russians did it. That's how big these hoaxes are. That's how evil this government is. It's not our government, ladies and gentlemen. It is criminal elements that are playing all countries off against each other because they can consolidate power during chaos. Because while the Catholic and Orthodox people are lined up killing each other and attacking each other, being manipulated, in Ukraine, the globalists sit back and laugh. Just like here, it'll be black or white versus Hispanic, or North versus South, or man versus woman, or gay versus straight. Why don't we all just agree on Bill of Rights, Constitution, due process, private property, right to defense, and be like, I'm for freedom, and you are a statist. See, people need to be in gangs. They need to be in clubs. They need to be in tribes. They need to be in packs. That's how we are. But it should be, I'm part of the invention pack. I'm part of the trailblazer pack. I'm part of the honorable pack. You know, in real business that's still in this country, the word gets out, oh, that's an honorable law firm. That's an honorable CPA. That's an honorable florist. That's an honorable repair guy. That's an honorable good painter. And you know what? They can charge more, and they get the business, and anyone with a brain works for them. And then all the losers just feed on the unwashed masses that don't know what they're doing. The most valuable thing in this world is being honorable. And as Dr. Paul Craig Roberts has said many times, America in the last decade has lost its soft power. We've lost our soft power, where people respected us so much that they would basically work with America, and that really helped our country. There's nothing wrong with having an empire of ideas, an empire of trade, an empire of goodwill, if it's consensual. Consensual collectivism is great, where we all agree on liberty, so we collectivize our will to make the world better. But it doesn't mean we collectivize and give up our will to join a collective. Oh, no, 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 no. See, collectivists are like the corporate Borg. And so as people that are individuals, we think, well, I won't work with anybody because I'm not a collectivist. That's not collectivism. That's teamwork, ladies and gentlemen. And the minute we figure out the difference between that and this robo-sapien humanoid garbage that is collectivism, this trendiness, this just accepting whatever the latest propaganda is, the minute we do that is the minute we begin to turn the tide. Now, I got a bunch of other news to cover as well, but I've got some other comments on this as well. I mean, sanctions on Ukraine, their police have been incredibly restrained.
We're looking through the lies and disinformation. It's Alex Jones on the GCN Radio Network.
One level, at a primitive level, because governments are so oppressive and out of control in most cases, we see the images of citizens in Ukraine, in the capital city, battling and defeating police with Molotov cocktails. And it looks like 1776, but when you examine it a little bit closer, they are shooting the police first with firearms. They are raiding military caches of weapons. That's professionals, folks. The CIA, that is the criminal elements of it, controlled by the globalist and George Soros, are over there involved in this to take down the final piece up to the wall with Russia to start a new Cold War, when Russia is trying to reform and has been reaching out to us. That is illegitimate. That is fraudulent. Major universities have come out with studies just yesterday that the U.S. continues to drop in press freedom, just like Russia. But economically, Russia is going up in economic freedom while we're going down. Russia is becoming more free in many ways than we are. China is becoming more free in some ways than we are in major studies. Look them up. And it is extremely, extremely frustrating to see this going on. But there are a lot of factoids and learning events we can have within this larger event that are extremely informative to the larger world. It's an educational experience. This is how the globalists take down countries and put in new regimes, is they create global economic climates that make it very hard all over the world, especially in what you call the poor old world, like Ukraine. They're poor compared to us. It's rough. The people just know the government is in charge. Hey, the EU is going to make it better. They promised. The majority of Ukrainians don't want to join. We don't care. That's you Orthodox Christians that are pro-Russia in the east of Ukraine. We're going to burn down your churches. They are absolutely just playing people off against each other mindlessly. Mindlessly. And the globalists will play Muslim off against Catholic in another country and, blow up their churches. The globalists don't care. They're going after everybody, and it's disgusting. So this is what they want to do in America with all this race politics and race division, and you wonder why there's all these mobs of young black people running around beating up whites everywhere, and the media tries to cover it up, because that's just the beginning of the fomenting so that we'll all fight with each other while the globalists rob us with Obamacare, rob us with the control of energy and gouging and the power plants, rob us with the dumbing down, rob us with the fines, the fees, the taxes, rob us with the NAFTA, the GATT, the TPP, all the new trade deals that are just specialized deals. But separately, militarily, you've got a country that doesn't have a Second Amendment, where it's all very hard to get a gun, basically a gun ban. And you've got the citizens with a little bit of training, because, the CIA guys and the $5 billion they've spent in the last year. On record, that guy's pull up an article. $5 billion spent by, quote, U.S. foundations in Ukraine in the last 12 months. $5 billion spent in the last year, and a couple of months, I guess 14 months, since the beginning of 2012, to put in color revolution groups, honchoed by the usual suspect. He's going to get your guns and your free speech, too. I'll get you and your little dog, too. George Soros, the Nazi collaborator, because he loves you and he's a democratizer. No, he wants that country to loot the daylights out of it, like they've done Greece and Spain and everywhere else. They want control of that government. They want control of those national bank accounts. They want control of the national assets. And they're going to then use that country to leverage it against all its neighbors. They're going to bring down the breadbasket of Europe right now. Ukraine, the biggest wheat producer in the whole region. Absolutely insane. Let me check it out right here. I'm going to pull it up right now. I'm going to go to the old NSA search engine, and I'm going to say $5 billion. $5 billion. We have it. Global research. American conquest by subversion. Victoria Newlands admits Washington has spent $5 billion to subvert Ukraine. That's a quote. Print that for me, and they'll have great bibliography at the bottom. That's global research. After 3 visits to Ukraine in 5 weeks, Victoria Newland from the State Department explains that the past 2 decades, no, it's the last year, the United States has spent $5 billion to subvert Ukraine, and assures her listeners that there are prominent businesses and government officials who support the U.S. project to tear Ukraine away from its historic relationship with Russia and into a U.S. sphere of influence via Europe. It's not a U.S. sphere, it's a banker sphere. And then it just goes on. And she's given low numbers at that Exxon event she was at. It's $5 billion the last 14, 15 months. But I'm digressing. Imagine the magnitude of that they're financing this. And imagine if we went out. Can you imagine if 1 million people took to D.C. and then started burning things all over the place and shooting police with firearms? They'd have helicopter gunships out killing thousands. They would probably nerve gas people. That's on record under the Sunshine Project, got leaked documents in 2000 that the Marine Corps standing by in every region with helicopters in mothballs with nerve gas at the locations, ready to be nozzled on to fly around and kill people. And they also have opiate bombs, which is basically heroin, where they fly over and spray that, but they say that kills more than 10% of people because you fall over and hit your head, you wreck your car, fires start. They say might as well just nerve gas people. You can, by the way, go read those. They were actually declassified, and the Marine Corps freaked out. They were reclassified. I had the head of the project on. He got so threatened they shut the project down, but then the Marines couldn't get Google to take it off the Wayback Machine. That is Google, isn't it? Look up Sunshine Project helicopters, Austin, Texas, because that was where one of the plans came out. And point is, they'd send out, you better have heavy-duty hazmat gear, folks, you want to do what they're doing in D.C. They're going to hit you with at least opiate knockout gas, a.k.a. Close Encounters of the Third Kind or whatever it is, where, they knock out the whole town so they won't see the space aliens land. Bottom line, ladies and gentlemen, that is the plan. That is the plan, is to use helicopters on you. Now, we got a Congress with a 6% approval rating. Obama's openly a dictator. Obama's openly trying to train the military that gun owners and veterans are the main enemy. They're converting the whole system of the military-industrial complex in Northcom over to go after the American people. It's high treason. And the American people really have the right, and I think the duty, until you realize that's what they want us to do, to actually do what the Ukrainians are doing everywhere that state governments don't sign on to the Republic and announce the federal government's been hijacked and is illegitimate. But I don't want people to do that. But under the Declaration of Independence, you have a right and kind of a pig-headed duty to fight this. But see, I fight in the info war because, as the Pentagon says, 90% of war is psychological. So I'm talking right to the Pentagon. You really want to help bring America down with the foreign banks? You really want to be collaborators like Vichy French? No, you don't. Good. Do whatever you can to leak the tyranny, expose it, don't go along with it. We're going to stop it. Just like you did with Syria not backing al-Qaeda. Good job. We're going to stop this together. We can do this, folks. We don't want violence. We don't want them to be able to start a civil war where we kill the police and military, they kill us, then the multinationals come in later. As the peace force, after America not having power for a year in many areas, the public accepted the UN peace force. As Henry Kissinger said back in 2000, he said, Americans would never accept the UN occupation of the New World Order, but a big enough crisis, they would happily accept United Nations peacekeepers in Los Angeles. And pull the quote up. So that's the issue here. And this isn't rhetoric, what you're hearing. This is the real issue of what's unfolding. This is the real issue of what's happening and what's going on. And this is the same program they're going to use in us, just different permutations, different implementations of it. And we are just on the brink of the whole world getting more and more unstable, as the British Ministry of Defense put out in 2007 in their report. The London Guardian carried it. It's Flash Mobs and Brain Chips, a frightening view of the future from the British Ministry of Defense. That's the actual headline, if you want to pull it up. Flash Mobs and Brain Chips, a frightening view of the future, by the Ministry of Defense. I had it British. Revolution, flash mobs, and brain chips, a grim vision of the future. I almost got it. London Guardian, did I get the year right? Yeah, 2007, April 8th. And then you can read the whole multi-hundred-page report when you link through on the PDF. And because this is what's being engineered, global economic shutdown, desperate populations, with the globalists there to finance revolutions before the real ones start, to then have the revolution then be dialed back in to even more globalist multinational control. Oh, you don't like how you're poor now in Ukraine? Let the EU come in. We'll make it better. EU comes in. A couple years later, they bankrupt even more. Let the EU openly appoint your presidents and leaders now. We'll fix it. The public goes along. Suddenly, the public doesn't. Oh, my gosh, your neighbor declared war on you.
In recent decades, worldwide social change has experienced unprecedented historical acceleration, particularly because instant mass communications, such as radio, television, and the internet, cumulatively have been stimulating a universal awakening of mass political consciousness. The resulting widespread rise in worldwide populist activism is proving inimical to external domination of the kind that prevailed in the age of colonialism and imperialism. Persistent and highly motivated populist resistance of politically awakened and historically resentful peoples to external control has proven to be increasingly difficult to suppress, as protracted guerrilla warfares in Vietnam, Algeria, or Afghanistan have amply demonstrated, and as the rising turmoil in both the Middle East and Southwest Asia are foreshadowing.
That's Zbigniew Brzezinski acting like all the things are happening, they're not behind it. So again, they know about the awakening, so they're going to hijack it before it happens. It's like Red Adair would detonate TNT, the famous oil well fighter, on top the oil well. with a bigger explosion to knock out the explosion. So that's how they describe it. They know when a country's about to melt down because they're manipulating the economics of it. They have the supercomputers on record. They go in with their revolution groups that are standing by to go, the answer is more government and more gun control and more open borders and more taxes. That'll make it great. Look, I'm trendy. They literally hire trendies and buy off local news reporters and people to be part of the movement, to act like they're against the government, to then get control. That group stays in a few years, gets paid off, acts like they're opposition against the new revolution group, so they just create synthetic revolution. That's why the revolution can't be just a new revolution, a new group. It has to be an idea, so that there's a manifesto, so that ours is the Declaration of Independence, Bill of Rights, Constitution. It goes past religion, race. Hey, I want my private property. I want my due process. I want my privacy. I want my own children. I want to run my own life. As long as I don't hurt anybody else, I want to be free. And I don't want government taking my tax money and giving it to select groups to build monopolies. You just right there enshrined everything that is true liberalism, true veritas, true constitutionalism, called right-wing hardcore extremism today. The labels mean nothing, ladies and gentlemen. What we have is a criminal, kleptocratic, global cabal using high-tech, Delphi techniques and other social engineering to manipulate the population. I only got this next segment and one more before LaRouche comes on. I want to hear from people, serious callers. Do you disagree with me on Ukraine? But, I mean, can you imagine if we were shooting police like that, what they would say? Notice these globalist-funded revolutions are always burn some stuff, shoot some cops. A real revolution would be marked down where all the globalists live and then just have an idea like V for Vendetta where you all go one day and do something. It's an idea. You can't stop it. You can't find the cells. There are no cells. These aren't real revolutions. They don't want to teach real revolution. You know what our founders did once they started coming after us? Once they started sending out death warrants on patriots? They're death warrants on them. Two-way street. Oh, no, we're all taught, go shoot a cop. Just some random cop out there. That's how you have a revolution under George Soros. You just go, pop, shoot a cop in the head. And then, oh, it's a hero, all this other. That's how communists roll, folks. That's what this garbage is, and it's wrong. It's globalist funded from the bowels of hell, ladies and gentlemen. Know your enemy. Identify who's behind it. You want to talk about violence, and I don't want that to happen. I want to be in the InfoWar, but I want to show the police who are getting these armored vehicles and all this preparing for war, what'll happen with a crowd, even of Soros morons, what they can do with Molotov cocktails and fire. You know, the police roll in these armored vehicles and try to stop the protesters burning down buildings, and they all sit there. By the way, I mean, it's so cowardly. You've got the military there and the police. They've got a machine gun on top. They don't even open fire. They've been told not to. And they roll in to try to stop them setting fires, and they throw fire all over the armored vehicle, and it burns up and blows up, obviously cooking the police inside. I mean, listen, I'm rolling up, and I've got a heavy machine gun on the top of my armored vehicle, and you're throwing Molotov cocktails at me? I'm going to open fire on you, period. And that's what I'm telling you. The police have been told, stand down, so all this can happen, because the government knew it was unpopular to join the EU. I told you this weeks ago, they're playing patty cake. They're involved in this, folks. They're encouraging this takeover. You watch. This is rotten, 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 rotten. But the point is that your armored vehicles aren't going to help you if there's a real civil war in this country. Of course, real revolutionaries aren't going to go after you when you're in your armored vehicle. In fact, real revolutionaries aren't going to go after the guys who are in the armored vehicles when they're at the bar. We're not going to go after you unless you come after us. We're going to go after your bosses. We're going to go after them where they live. And everybody knows that. All right? We're going to go after the people pulling the strings. We're not your enemy, police and military, and you know that. But the whole point is that they are trying to maneuver us in this situation, and we need to stop it. Here's the toll-free number. I want quick calls, just your take on Ukraine, where you think it's going. It's obviously staged. It doesn't mean there aren't bad on both sides, but this is just bad news, folks. The globalists are trying to overthrow any sovereign country they can, from Syria to Ukraine. And our Congress voted last week to endorse all this and to call these people heroes and call for sanctions, give the police fire back when fired upon. And I mean, I'm sorry, folks, it's cowardly to shoot a cop who isn't shooting at you. You know, I don't want a French Revolution where you put in one group of criminals after another and things get even worse. I don't want to sign on to every globalist revolution that comes along because the Ukraine wouldn't sign on to the EU and be politically taken over. I image Saruman the wizard talking to Gandalf, and he says, I tried to have you aid and join me willingly, but you have chosen the path of pain. And that's basically what they've done to the Ukraine. And it's totally lawless. It's totally illegal. It'd be like if the Russians were trying to get Mexico to break up and, you know, become an enemy of the U.S. or something. It is absolutely bad guy behavior. And it's not even our government. It's George Soros and the foundations that have already hijacked us. That's the thing. It's all done in our name. It is outrageous. And they will do the same garbage here, ladies and gentlemen. There's Kurt Nemo's article, Soros-supported protesters turn violent in Ukraine. Protesters want country to integrate with European Union. That's right. Join with the big superstate or we'll burn and shoot everyone. That's foreign sedition, ladies and gentlemen. I don't care what the protesters were saying. We're going to burn everything if you don't join this political group from the outside. That's globalism. That's the New World Order. They come finance an idiot group, a minority of the people in Ukraine, to burn everything if people don't go along with this. It's outrageous. And our media calls them freedom fighters, just like they called the Serb rebels. The Muslims heroes, and they called Al-Qaeda in Syria heroes. Okay, Tom, make your point about Ukraine then, and then talk about how we can use the judicial system, the court system. I agree. It's actually very powerful. People just don't know their rights and don't use it. We've gotten to this position because we've become very jellyfish-like. Free people will be free. People that act like sheep will be slaves. But go ahead and give us your take on Ukraine first.
Sure. 2 quick points on that, and I'll jump right into the court system real fast. As far as Ukraine is concerned, who knows who may have caused the first outbreak of violence that may not have been justified. Certainly when it gets to this point, nobody's going to win in a situation like that. And I've heard you say it before, and I think most people realize that when it gets to the point where you're throwing bottles and you're killing people, nothing good is going to come from that. There's the outlet, even if you're in a country where there's not a judicial system to utilize like we're lucky enough to have, you still have words and you can still appeal to basic human common sense, and most people are going to be receptive to that. I've been in situations where myself and my partner were outnumbered, and the crowd could have crushed us, could have done what they wanted to. You look for somebody who's in a position of leadership within the crowd because they all have one or two, usually more, and you appeal to their basic sense of being a fellow human being.
I know my point. Have you seen the images of riot police that are just standing there being shot by the so-called freedom-fighting protesters? I mean, my issue is, imagine if we had protesters shooting police, what our media would say. It just shows how this is all being run by criminal elements in this country and in the EU as well, and how it's a total double standard. I mean, I want to be called a freedom fighter because I go out and have a pro-Second Amendment rally, not, you know, some extremist or get arrested. Meanwhile, these people are shooting police that have done nothing because they want to burn down the government building. And again, I don't like seeing police shooting people that are unarmed, and I don't like watching people shoot the police. And I've got to say the Ukrainian police are extremely restrained. Because let me tell you, I don't care if I was a cop or not. You start shooting at me, I'm going to shoot at you. And it just really upsets me. I appreciate your call, Tom. You're right. We should talk about more ways to wage war peacefully. The voting box, the ballot box, the grand jury box, the soap box. I mean, there's just so much we got to do here. But the image of George Soros-funded people shooting riot cops. I mean, 10 feet away, boom. And it's like, hero, oh, you're such a hero. No, you're worse than a cop beating some woman with a billy club. See, I don't like bullies, folks. And the police have been extremely restrained over there, and now all hell's breaking loose. Judy, go ahead.
Hi, Alex. I think one of the things that needs to be brought to the forefront maybe is the Port of Sevastopol, Black Sea, if people don't understand the gravity of the situation of Russia actually losing that port, that it's a huge indicator of just how important this whole massacre in Kiev is what it really is all about, because they don't want to lose their port. Russia does not want to lose that port. And the other thing I just want to say real quick is that I think in terms of how we need to talk to men in America, I think there has to be a bit of compassion, only because we've been, so prosperous, and this is such a horrific turn of events that is taking place in our nation, that they're not necessarily jellyfish as much as they're scared out of their wits. And
they don't know what to do, and they don't have you're a great caller. If you want to hold, I'll come back to you. Well, as soon as the Ukraine refused to enter into the European Union last month, all hell broke loose there in the country with Soros-backed NGOs trying to destabilize the country. We now see arms being served up to the so-called liberty-loving freedom fighters, as they're being called on our news, to shoot the police that have been, until now, very, very restrained. Again, folks, you know that I am not a Ruski-phile. I don't have some darling love of the Russian government or any of those systems. I do have a liking for peace and not having nuclear war. And I also like common law and common sense, and I wouldn't like the Russians trying to foment sectarian violence to break up Mexico and start a civil war there to destabilize the United States. We have the State Department minions. I have the articles right here. We're going to talk to Lyndon LaRouche about it in just a moment, openly bragging that they've spent $5 billion to destabilize the country. America Conquest by Subversion, Victoria Nuland admits Washington spent $5 billion to, quote, subvert Ukraine. There's video of that. And this is a serious situation. We saw them try to start war in 2008 with the Russians. We've seen them in Syria try to hand that over to al-Qaeda. They know revolution's coming because of world economic meltdown. They want to preemptively start it, in my view, to try to bring chaos out of it so they can then pose as the saviors. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. And it's extremely immoral that Congress a few weeks ago passed a resolution praising the violent demonstrators and saying the government should just let them take over. Again, I try to study the Ukrainian situation. The world's a very complex place. I'm not saying the government's perfect, but they're trying to remain neutral. This is one of the biggest geopolitical things in a long time right now. And is part of a proxy war with Russia. Make no mistake, Syria was about that too. And George Soros is in there as always, stirring things up.
Now, we've talked a little bit about the historical context surrounding the Ukrainian protests, specifically Stalin's campaign to crush the Ukraine. Now, considering the rampant corruption and economic disparity that is facing the Ukrainians, is that something that we're kind of seeing happening here in the U.S.? Just take a look at how Stalin took down the Ukraine in the first place, and let me know if any of this looks familiar to you. First, he removed the leaders and the old order. Here we have the feds attacking the founding fathers, calling them terrorists. They're undermining any opposition or reform with rampant election fraud. There's blatant persecution of party leaders and targeting of Tea Party groups by the IRS, just to name a few. Next, he co-opted the church leaders. Their message was basically support the government or be taken out. Here we have the IRS and the 501c churches dutifully looking the other way and justifying what the government does with Romans 13. Now here's the big one that should be blatantly obvious. Divide and conquer the population with massive immigration. Now, in the case of the Ukraine, it was with a massive influx of Russians who supported the government and had no loyalty to either the Ukraine, its people, its government, its culture, or its traditions. Now, here in the U.S., amnesty and immigration reform is being shoved down our throats, as well as this attack on our culture. It's not so we can be the country that welcomes people with open arms, but so that voters who will support big government and have no loyalty to America can flood the polls. But the last technique, and quite possibly the one with the most lasting psychological effects on the Ukrainians, death by forced starvation. Stalin starved the people out with contrived shortages. He introduced a program of agricultural collectivization that forced farmers to give up their private land, equipment, and livestock and join state-owned, factory-like collective farms. Here we have the same thing. They're shutting down small farmers, making it illegal to buy raw products from them, slapping these small farmers with tons of regulations, while government-friendly farms are free to spread contaminated food. And we're, of course, seeing the implementation of Agenda 21 plans, as well as this GMO manufactured food crisis. But, of course, they say they're creating the GMOs for this food shortage. Well, if you would just stop shutting down small farms, there wouldn't be food scarcity in cities and towns all over the world. But of course, that's what they do, create the problem and then present the solution so that everyone needs big government. So that's why I think these protests, they go a lot deeper than just anti-government activists fighting to join the EU. In this clash, like so many others where we're seeing a civilization finally rising up to overthrow a corrupt government, there is one common denominator: big banks.